So yes, good morning everyone. Welcome to this session focusing on grant writing and raising finance for your sustainable business. And we can be a bit flexible with our interpretation of sustainable because my company, Our Pledge, really focuses on sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability. But we also understand that for any business to succeed, it needs to have a sustainable business model, it needs to have finances. And for the whole ecosystem to work and for us all to work together, we all need to be sustaining each other. So by being in the community that we're in, and for the most part, it looks like this is the case, that we're all based somewhere in or around Waltham Forest. So we really look at sort of community ecosystems, business ecosystems, and so on. Our mission is really to connect people through community projects and by looking at sustainability through a very kind of open lens, trying to bring us all in to kind of collectively work together. So that's me and my company, Our Pledge, and I'm here with two of my colleagues, Jess and Tolu, today, who'll be helping out. We're hosting this session, but for the most part, I'm going to be handing over to Sam from Boost, who actually I met through needing some help myself to raise money to create my sustainable business. So I was actually supported by Sam through a grant writing application. So I know that she is a reliable expert in this area, not least of which because she herself has raised money for her business too. So I invited her to support us with this session and give us an insight from her perspective about how we can look at the topic of raising money in an open and easy way and try and kind of give us some of her top tips. So this is going to be an interactive session. You'll be offered the opportunity to take some time to work on your own your own headlines for a potential funding proposal that you might write. I'm hoping that the canvases that I sent through to you by email did reach you. So hopefully, and if they didn't, do put a note in the chat. We'll be sharing them on the screen, but the idea was that you'd have something to work from. And I think so as long as you've got pen and paper, basically, you should be fine. But yeah, so we're going to be working through some questions that the majority of funding applications will look for you to answer in one way or another. And so you'll have an opportunity to work on those and then share them and pitch them to each other as well, if that feels okay for you. And we won't, just to say, I am recording the session, but I won't record the breakout rooms. So nothing that you say in those rooms will be recorded. I'll pause for those sections. And and I think we're going to be here for we get a copy of the presentation. Sam, are we happy to share the presentation? Yeah, lovely. Yes, you will. Hi, Jacqueline. Nice to see you again. Hi, everyone. Oh, it's so nice to see all the names in the chat. Thank you for popping your information in there. Hi, Arthur. Hi, Manuel. Great. For new people who've just joined, if you want to put your name and the name of your business or a bit about your business in the chat, that would be really welcome. And also where you are, so that we can get a picture of who's where in the borough. As I was saying, the Elevate programme and our approach from Our Pledge is really about connecting people, creating community, power through the collective. So it's great to be able to introduce you to each other as well. And if we're all going through this same kind of battle together to try and raise money, to maybe meet other people who can be a kind of sounding board or support or check in. So it's really nice for you guys to be able to see who else is in the room. Before I go any further, does anyone have any questions? Is there anything that isn't clear? Anything that you need to know at this stage? All good? Great. Okay, well, you do have the chat facility there if something comes up. I'll be trying to keep an eye on that as well, Jess. And we are recording this morning. Welcome to people who've just arrived. But as I said, I will pause for the breakout rooms. I think that's everything. feel like there's something I wanted to say and I've forgotten what it was. It will come back. So, okay, so I'm going to hand over to Sam. Hi, Sabrina. Nice to see you again as well. Sam, over to you.
Morning, everybody. It's lovely to see so many people on this call. I think it's really exciting to hear from you all. But I should start with a confession, being that I'm probably the only one who isn't in London right now, because I am based in Cornwall and I run Boost, and Boost is a kind of tech and innovation company, mostly focused on female issues or women-centered design. We mostly work with women who've had breast cancer. So that's just a little bit of a background to our own business and story, but we'll delve into that a little bit more if it's relevant throughout, if I need to use examples from what we've done for Boost before. As Rachel suggested, I have been raising money for my own company for quite some time, and I sort of discovered that it was a little bit of my, I don't know whether some people call it a bit of a ninja skill that you develop over time. I didn't know I had it until I suddenly needed it. And then I realised that I perhaps could help other people as well. And that's why I ended up working with Rachel and meeting the lovely Our Pledge team and getting involved in lots of different things where I really felt like it was it was appropriate to kind of support people who were finding raising funding a little bit more daunting, but where people were doing some really good things in the world and they almost needed to be funded. Like that's what was driving me to reach out and to help other people. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today and to be speaking to you all and to be hearing a little bit more about your business. So I'm going to kick off with the presentation, hopefully. So we're going to be talking about grant writing and creating your funding narrative. And I've said it's grant writing, but really it's fundraising. It's how you present yourself and what you're asking for. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter what kind of funding you're going for, you need to tell a convincing story to whoever it is you want to give that money to you. You have to compete with lots of other competing narratives to ensure that yours is the one that is the strongest and that is standing out to people. And what we're going to have a look at today is how you can structure that narrative, how you can start to tell that story in a way that will give you, hopefully, the best and strongest chance of securing whatever funding route that you decide is the most appropriate for you. And I think at the end, we can talk about different funding routes and all of those different things. But at the moment, what we are going to focus on that more of that how question, like how do I approach this? How do I make a start with actually doing something to start to structure what I'm asking for and how to do it. So that's what we're doing today. There's my contact details on there. I will share my LinkedIn in the chat in a bit when I'm not so distracted by looking at everybody else's comments. So I do apologize, I haven't shared mine yet. You'll find me on LinkedIn if you want to. So that's where we're going to start today. So with that in mind, the first thing that we need to talk about, I guess, is some general points about funding. It's really quite important to have a think about what you need the money for before you start to think about what the funding options are, because what you need the money for quite often helps to predicate what your options might be. For example, if you need money for core funding for running your everyday staff costs, for paying the rent on your centre or your office where you're at, that core funding is difficult quite often to get that from grants, because grants are usually project-based or added value kind of level. However, if you are, for example, a museum or arts and heritage centre, then it might be possible for your core funding to come from a grant. So you do need to be really careful that you're looking at what you need the money for and then aligning that to those funding options. So thinking really carefully about where you might go to find that pot of money. For core funding for business like Boost, we've just had some core funding, and it's come from equity investment. So we've sold some shares in our company to raise some funding, and that is actually covering our wages, costs and bits and pieces that we've
78754.
Oh,
Hi there, welcome. If you've just popped in, can you mute? Or I'll see if I can find a way to mute.
Hi everyone. So core funding, are you doing, do you need to raise money for core funding? Is there a project or added value or R&D work that you couldn't do if you didn't have a bit more of an injection of cash, but is really cool and really needs to happen in the world, or is really essential to your business growth and your market really needs it, but you just can't afford it? So these are the types of questions that you need to ask yourself. Why do you need to raise the money before you start to look at where you might get that money from? So that's an important place to start. So types of funding, and we'll talk about this again. We'll do a sort of cyclic kind of presentation, because we'll come back to this. But grants, obviously grants are pretty nice if you can get them, but they're not always 100% funding, so you might need to find some cash to match against it. Equity, you need to release some ownership of your company or your organization, which is a little bit tricky for some people. Loans have their place. I mean, don't be put off by loans. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable at some time to have a think about just having that cash injection. And if you can afford to do it and you don't want to jump through all the hoops that come through with other types of funding, then that's perhaps something you can do. And then we've also got crowdfunding, which Rachel can tell you an awful lot about, more than I can, but obviously finding out ways to encourage your customers to help to fund the thing that you're doing. But these are not comprehensive lists of funding. So yesterday when Rachel and I were walking through this presentation, we were talking about how some of these cross match with each other. For example, you can have a platform like Crowdcube, where you are actually releasing equity, but it's still a kind of crowdfunding platform. So there's lots of different variations about where you might get your money from, but the most important thing really at the beginning is to think about why you need to raise it in the first place. What are you trying to do with it? Okay.
Can I ask a question, Sam? Sorry, just to interrupt you. Yeah. I just wondered if you could define core funding again. I think you did touch on it, but just to be clear about what that's referring to.
Okay, so for me, your core funding is like your general overheads, the stuff that you have to do anyway just to survive. So it's like your core business. It is your normal staffing costs, your usual wages bills, your usual materials costs, your usual rent and overheads, all of those things that I would consider as core funding. It does get more nuanced, because there are some, for example, an Innovate UK grant, which everybody knows that I love. I love Innovate UK. Innovate UK grants do pay some towards your core costs. They will pay some overheads based on your wages costs.
I'm a mother-in-law. I ride at it all the time. I'm the most, I'm this terrifying woman. My wife disapproving.
Oh, thank you. So there are a little bit, there is some nuances in there, but core funding for me is like your day-to-day business, your day-to-day life, your day-to-day expenses. Projects and added value are stuff that you couldn't do if you didn't have that injection of money, but will give a really strong return on investment and will make a massive impact either for you as a company and or the people that benefit from you doing what you do, or some sort of impact in the world. There will be a return on investment there that you probably couldn't access if you didn't have that injection of funding, and that's where grants really do come into their own. And R&D is particularly risky for smaller enterprises to enter into, because it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time away from perhaps your core activities. So R&D can be quite risky for a company to really invest in. But investing in R&D can again, accelerate that business growth. So looking for funding to specifically spend on R&D activities might be something that you do feel like you need to do or you want to do, but you just need to manage that, and it can't necessarily come from your normal day-to-day pots of money.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Yeah, and just to say, I'm sure everyone knows this, but just in case, R&D is research and development. So if you're developing a new product or service, or you need to do some tech exploration, then you are doing some R&D.
Yeah, sorry. Please do shout at me if I say things that
no problems. I'm here to ask the sort of maybe obvious questions just to be sure. So
thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. So you've been, as Rachel said earlier, you've been sent a narrative canvas, but if you haven't got one to hand in your emails or wherever, don't worry, because we are going to go through these stages by stages, and we will check that you've got one at the end to make sure that you've got something to go away with and work on. And we're not expecting that we'll be working up this in full and in its entirety just in the space of this morning, but what we're going to do is just break these things down. So the narrative canvas is something that I've developed to help people to think about their approach to finding that funding and to completing a funding application. And that doesn't just mean grant applications, that means any approach to funding. You have to tell your story, because ultimately it's your story and the way you put yourself forward that is going to convince whoever it is to cough up that money for you. And that's what you want to do, hopefully. That's why you're all here. So the narrative canvas is quite straightforward in terms of really breaking down and honing in on those core messages that we think is the most important, really. And from my experience of writing grant funding and securing funding in equity investment and all the different types of ways that I've been working over the last couple of years, these types of questions that we'll go through this morning are relevant in each of those different situations. So just again to re-emphasize, I have worked, and I've seen people who have signed up to this session today. I have worked in arts and culture, so I have raised money through things like the Arts Council England programmes. I've raised money and have been working until very recently on big heritage lottery funding applications, do Innovate UK kind of grants, as well as looking at equity investment and different types of funding. So I've been pulling all of those different experiences in those applications and sort of condensing it down into the real core things that you probably need to cover and to really refine to get that narrative to be really strong, to make sure that people are going to give you that money that you need, and that you can communicate that well with whoever you want to fund you. So the first part on your narrative canvas is your need or challenge. And how we're going to structure this session today is that we're going to go through a couple of these parts of the canvases that are related to each other. And then once we've done that, Rachel will be putting you into a breakout room. And the idea is that you spend a little bit of time, just before we go in the breakout room, spend a little bit of time making some notes, and then go into the breakout room to share your need or challenge and your information with each other. And we're hoping that you'll be able to think about how you're communicating what you want to do. If you can, if it's at the stage where you're able to have a think about that. So the need or challenge is the issue that you're trying to solve. You need to think about how you actually know that this is an issue. And one of the things I will say a lot through this presentation is to quote some evidence is really, really powerful. So if it's not just your word, your say so that this is an issue, if you can have something else that backs you up, that's really, really useful. And that might be your own data. That's fine. It might be that you have done your own customer surveys and you know that what would make your business better is better access to reusable cups. But you need to have some sort of evidence. Evidence is really crucial. If you haven't got that evidence, then you can mark it as a gap in your narrative, and you can come back later and you can really address those gaps, because making sure your narrative is flowing and linking to each other is really important, because that strengthens what you're saying overall. It strengthens your story, and it stops anybody who's going to be awkward in the funding body, or whoever you're asking for money, really being able to pick holes in it and thinking of reasons why they shouldn't give you any. So the tighter your narrative is, the better. How do you know that there is something that needs to be addressed, and what evidence is this for this need or challenge? How do you really know that these people, not just I think that, you need to have the evidence to say it? So the need or challenge is the first part of the thing. So I'm just going to give you just a couple of minutes. If you've got any notes to write down on the need and challenge, if you've got your funding narrative canvas to hand and you want to jot something in there, that's great. If you just got a pen and a piece of paper, I'm just going to give you a minute or so to consider what the need or challenge is that your business is trying to address right now. What do you need this funding for? What good are you trying to do in the world? I'm going to do this too, because if I go in a breakout room, I can share it as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking I might do mine as well.
Yeah, you do yours as well, Rachel.
Yeah.
We'll do ours.
Well, I was almost going to say it because I don't know if it's helpful, because this might be completely new to some people to even think in these terms. So if it's helpful, for us, the issue that we're trying to solve is that sustainability as a concept is quite overwhelming for people, particularly if you're trying to stitch it into your business, if it's not core to your business. So we want to make sustainability simple. That's the challenge, is that sustainability seems complex and a bit overwhelming. So we're trying to make it simple and actionable. We know that it's something that needs to be addressed because we were asked to help. It started with us. We knew for ourselves that was a challenge, and then we kept coming across people that said, oh, it's really overwhelming, we don't know what to do, it's all so complex. And then the evidence was that we did some focus groups, we did some market research, so we did some surveys. Oh, hi there. If you're not on mute, can you mute? I'm trying to make sure everyone's muted, but if you're not muted, if you could just double check, because I can hear a bit of background noise. But yeah, so we did some focus groups, we did some market research through surveys, and then we looked out into the world to see where reports were being written that said, people are finding sustainability quite an overwhelming and complex issue, and so there's a need. People want to understand it, they want to do something about it. So that was some of our evidence. So hopefully that's helpful, just as a guideline to the kinds of things that you might be saying. But there's all sorts of ways that you can answer that question.
Okay. Yeah, I will just echo that. It doesn't have to be a refined answer right now, but just to give you an idea. And if you don't know what kind of evidence might back it up, that's fine too for now. But you can flag that as a gap that you might need to return to. So what kind of evidence would back it up? How do we find that? Do we need to go out ourselves and find it, or is it just research or whatever? But at the moment, it's just great to have an idea about you as a business and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next bit. Please keep writing if you need to. And then we have the idea. So you've identified what the problem is in the world, the problem that you're trying to solve, the issue you're addressing. And now we want to say how you would solve the problem. So in this one, ideally, we'd be thinking about what you're actually going to do, which would help us to frame the project. And again, doing this off the cuff is a little bit tricky. But if you focus on the high level idea, how are you going to solve the problem first? Then thinking about what you're actually going to do, again, a bit like the evidence in the previous slide, that can come a bit later. What you're actually going to do could be something that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and within a time frame. So we call that a SMART target. It's something that probably makes me sound quite teachery, and I do apologise. I used to be a teacher. You'll probably get that vibe through the presentation. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Can't help it. But when I'm writing when I'm asking people to give me money, it's really useful, I've found, to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely with what you're asking for. So if I just said, I need some money because I need to teach people about what sustainability is, it just gets people to say, well, how are you going to do that then? What are you actually going to do with the money I give you? And you haven't really addressed that. And the more people can question you or pick holes in what you're asking for, then the more difficult it will be for them to have the confidence to give you the funding that you're asking. So it's really important to try and hone in exactly what you want to do and what your idea is, so that they understand how you're solving the problem very specifically. So a SMART target could be, we will deliver 8 workshops to each workshop has 15 people in to help them to understand what sustainability could mean to their business. We will do that by December 2022. And then that's a specific thing that you're doing to solve that problem that people don't understand about how sustainability can be implemented in their business. It's measurable because you can go, oh yeah, we did the 8 workshops, that was great, and 15 people came to each one, and we measured it because it was all on Zoom and it was all great, and we've got a record of it, so we know that we've done what we said we were going to do. You can also measure it with some data that would get feedback from those participants. So at the end of the sessions, did they actually learn a little bit more about what sustainability could mean to them and how they could implement it? Well, yeah, they all did, because it was wonderful. And Rachel, our pledge, are fantastic, and they did their job really well. So it was all great, and they did that, and then it's measurable. It's achievable because it's achievable and it's realistic. You could do it. It's not a pie in the sky kind of pipe dream. It's not open-ended. It's quite structured. And there's a time frame attached. So particularly for things like grant funding, especially, but even equity funding, they do want things to be planned, to be delivered within a certain time. Having things really open-ended is risky, because it's a bit like, well, where's my money going? What's being achieved in this time? So if you can pin down a time frame, that will help you to think about what you're actually delivering. And then I've also added a little note about outputs and outcomes. So outputs are the things that your activity is going to spit out, what it's going to give to the world, what is going to happen from it. And the outcomes are sort of like the longer impact from that, the softer impact. So the output would be the 8 sessions. You've delivered the 8 sessions, but the outcomes is that 15 or 10 to 15 people at each session take away a sustainability plan then for their business that they can implement in the future. And then you might measure that outcome again later on to see how they're getting on with delivering that. So the output is the thing, that the kind of product that comes from the thing you're doing, and the outcome is about measuring the impact from that. Again, we're not expecting you to pull these out of the air, but you might also have joined this session with some idea about the problem that you wanted to solve and how you might solve that problem. So if you did join that session with that in mind, it would be really great. We'll just spend a minute now to give you a little bit of time to write down some notes, if you can, about your idea. So think back, it has to relate to that problem that you started with, the need or challenge. How are you going to address that need or challenge that you wrote down in the other slide?
Can I say one additional, or maybe 2 additional points? Just because I've also worked as a commissioner, so I've read lots of grant applications, and I think the tendency can be that you feel that you need to be writing in a sort of jargonistic way to be convincing, and actually the opposite is true, because I quite often have made notes that say, what do you mean by this? Because people say, oh, I want to develop an interactive platform that enables integration of creative data or something. And actually what you're saying is you want to make a website that showcases the work of photographers and enables them to comment on each other's photographs and network through the website. So sort of an interactive platform is too vague. You need to say it's going to be a website and an app, and that's okay. It doesn't matter if it sounds basic. It's, the easier it is for the person reading the application to understand, the better. There's no, most things they come down to something quite simple. So don't be concerned about seeming to say something that feels quite sort of crude in a way, like, oh, this is just a very basic description of what it's going to be. The nuance is how you do it, what comes out of it, what are your outputs and what are your outcomes. So that's just one thing to kind of note. And also to say, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but outcomes can also be things like, so say for our sustainability seminars, people feel more confident. They take action that, maybe they have a change in their business model, but it's come from the confidence, it's come from their understanding of how to measure impact. Yes. Simple and clear, absolutely. Thank you for that comment.
Outcomes tend to be, I guess, what they traditionally call like softer yes. things that come out of it. And you can also have unintended outcomes, which is really exciting, but we won't necessarily go into those right now because you can't talk about them at the very beginning. But those are really important too when you come to do your evaluation works. I just want to echo what Rachel said as well, that we've touched on, is that especially if you're going for grant funding and you're filling in grant forms, please be aware that your grant assessor will see hundreds or thousands of grant forms applying for the same pots of money. So this, again, is why really honing in what you're asking for and how you're asking for it. And this whole narrative canvas and this whole session is really about how you would present that to them, because they are going to see lots of them, and if they can't understand it from the beginning or it's too difficult, people are going to skim read it. Like when I was a teacher and I used to mark year 8 13-year-old essays about whatever, you would end up skim reading it a little bit, to be fair, because you had so many to get through and you just needed to make decisions and you needed to mark it, and you'd look for the key points rather than all the particular nuances. But then what the trick is really to see if you can engage people past that skim read. So to have something that's really well structured, really clear and jargon free, because they might not know anything about your sector or anything about what you're trying to do, but explain that very clearly, then you're going to get them to be able to delve in a little bit deeper to your application.
Simple explanations in terms that everyone can understand are very useful for everyone, including assessors. I assessed digital arts funding grants for a while, and the most common comment that I wrote was, for people to include in when they're writing their thing, to include the statement, by which I mean, by which I mean a website, by which I mean 6 Zoom sessions, by which I mean breast formations for women who have suffered from breast cancer. Like it really basic. What is the thing? What is the thing? I just wanted, before we go on to the next section, I wanted to share an observation from our group about the definition of need. So when we're talking about the need or challenge in this context, we're talking about the need out there within the world, as opposed to your need. So it's implicit within the application that you need money. So the idea of the application is to explain the need that you're meeting in the world. So what does the world need that your solution is going to meet? What's the gap in the market that you are going to fill? So you're talking about the need rather than saying, I need the money for, which is very valid because you do need the money, but equally to say there is a need in the world for, to go back to my example, some clarity and confidence around sustainability, and that's what my product is going to meet. So just to give you that clarity around that concept of need. Over to you, Sam.
So again, so leading on from what Rachel was saying, we now need to look at who the market is and who is affected by this problem that you've identified. So you might have already actually done that, because in your conversation, certainly in our breakout rooms, it was implied when we were talking about what the need or challenge is, what needs to happen in the world, what's going on out there that our businesses want to solve. The market was kind of part of that conversation. But this is an opportunity now to identify really who they are. Who are you solving this problem for? Is there a primary market? So the key focus of the people who are going to benefit, or the organizations that are going to benefit, or the ways that you're going to make a difference with your outcomes? Is there a primary market for those? Or perhaps is there a secondary market? There might not be a secondary market. And by primary and secondary markets, just to clarify, as an example for us, we make recyclable breast prostheses. Mostly they're for women who've had surgery because women have had breast cancer and they've had a mastectomy, and then we provide them a product. That's our primary market. But we do have a secondary market of people from the transgender community who also want to create a feminine shape under their clothing and will also buy our products. So we do now focus on both of those markets, as in our primary market is the main driver because that is the biggest market for us and that's where we position. But we are aware of a secondary market, and we know that we are also solving a problem for them, although that might not be the main total focus of what we were doing. So who are you solving the market for? Who are your customers likely to be? Who do you want your customers to be? Who are going to benefit from the thing that you're doing to solve that need or challenge? Who is going to be benefiting from your idea? And then also to think about how you would reach them. So we might call that the route to market. How are you going to actually get these people to either buy the thing that you're doing, or to engage with the thing that you're doing, or to download the app, or to access the website, or whatever it is that you're doing to address this problem, to help them to achieve the outcomes that they need? How will you be reaching out to them and finding that they can engage with you? And you can do that in different ways. So, for example, involving people in your project from the beginning of having your idea is a really good way to make sure that when you've got something to sell to that market, that they really genuinely want it because they've been involved in the designing of it all the way through. So for the example of Rachel's sustainability workshops, actually consulting with groups of people who might attend the workshop while you're designing what that workshop will be will mean that hopefully they'd get more out of it when it comes to the end. You can do evaluations, you can do, I said workshops, design consultations, you can do user testing with people all the way through. And that means that you are reaching your customers even before you've got an actual product or finished thing to give them, or before you've actually got to that point of producing your outputs. You can reach customers in that in-between stage. Then you have your communications plan. So if you've got your final product, or you're trying to recruit people to those workshops, or you're trying to get people to be involved in the after school clubs that teach children about finance, to use an example from our breakout room, the communications, how will you talk to them? Are they all for us? We work with a lot of women who are in their 50s and 60s, and so they tend to be on Facebook and they're not really on Instagram. And to find those ways, those channels for reaching people. And your routes to market, often think about your sales funnels, how you will find early adopters for your service or your product. So those people who are going to be easy to and not necessarily easy, that's the wrong word, I guess. They're going to be receptive to doing the thing or buying the thing or engaging with the things that you're doing, because you know that they have this problem and they're very vocal that they have this problem. So you'll be able to help to solve it. And then think about your opportunities to grow. How big is this market potentially, and how realistic is it for you to address these needs? Perhaps in your locality, that might even be, we can produce a model that, you know, could meet these needs of these people here where we live right now, but actually other borough councils could also implement that model. Or, you know, there's other things to go that we could expand that market further if we planned to in the future. Something to consider. Might not always be relevant, but it's something to consider. And then the last question really is, have you engaged with this market before? Because if you do, and you have, and you know them, then that's really important to say, because having some track record of already working with these customers means that if you're doing something new, or you've identified a new problem for that group, then you have the evidence to tackle that. And that helps to de-risk the application for funding. So if you're going out to people and you're saying, I need money to do this thing, knowing that you've already engaged with this market, or you have been engaging with it before, is quite a useful thing, because it just gives you that evidence, and it gives that reassurance to the funders that you're able to deliver what you said you're going to deliver. The next one to think about, and this is still related to the market, is who your competitors might be and where your market gap is. So this is a really key part of your narrative, because if you want people to give you some funding, if your problem that you're trying to solve is already solved by lots of other people with lots of different choices, then it's really interesting to think about how you would explain to your funders why your solution is better, or what happens with it, or why your solution is an improved one. Or if there isn't anybody addressing that need specifically in the way that you're proposing to, then this is a really good way of communicating that too. So think about that need or challenge, that problem. And is there anybody else who is addressing it, even if they're addressing it really badly, so they're not really addressing it, but they're kind of, they think they are, or it's in that space, or there's something else going on. How are they addressing that problem, those other competitor companies, if you can think of any that are in the same space as you? And how would our idea, how would we, our company, our organisation, our idea, how would that be addressing it in a better way? So how will we be better meeting that market need than the existing offerings? So what's the difference? What's the kind of unique selling point that makes us a bit different to the other people who are already working in that space? And the diagram that you have there is what I would call a market positioning exercise. And I haven't given you one of these, so it's just, and again, you'll get the slides after, just something to have a think about as a way of mapping your competitors. So this is kind of what we might do if we were thinking about who was also delivering what we do, but where our particular unique selling point, what makes our solution better, where it would sit on that diagram. So I might, for example, with my business, I might look at high price customized breast forms, which are hyper realistic, they're non-recyclable, they're kind of up towards the high price bit. The lower price, you can get something called a knitted knocker, which is free and knitted by volunteers and just goes in the bra, but it's not very functional. It's a bit like wearing a teddy bear shoved down your top. So it's quite cute, but women don't really wear it. So that would go into the low price kind of structure. And international reach would be the big brands that are in our space that deliver mastectomy clothing and products. And the low reach would be those very small individual individual companies, a bit like us. So at the moment we might be low reach and we're more towards the low price, but there is that kind of gap there where there's not very many other people sitting within that cross frame. And the labels of your market position exercise might change depending on what kind of product you service you have. So you might be thinking about high price or low price. You might be thinking about your international or local reach. You might be thinking about instead of international or local, you might be thinking more about I don't know, the bespoke or off the shelf. You might be thinking about all sorts of different sustainable and, you know, traditional manufacturing methods. There might be all sorts of things that you could put there where you could plot your competitors. We're not going to ask you to do that, luckily, now, but we are going to just introduce this idea as a way of helping to explain why your idea needs to be funded and why there is room for it to exist in the world, when there might be other people initially might be solving the same problem as you, but you can solve it differently, and you can solve it in a different and in a better way where there is still a gap in the market. I hope that kind of makes sense. It's very difficult to explain on this, but I can show you some diagrams of the things that we've done for Boost at the end of this. If we do have time at the very end, I can show you some really quite detailed market position diagrams. So this is just an introduction to this at the moment. So key competitors, who else is doing what you're doing in your space? So just a quick note to write down who those might be for you. And we'll just spend a minute doing that. Who kind of does what you do but doesn't do it quite so well? What are the alternatives?
One of the ways that I guess has become clear to me about these questions is thinking about Google search. Like, who's doing the Google search to find you? What words are they putting in? And who's going to come up if they put those words in currently? You know, like just really basic human behaviours of the 21st century. Not that's been a human behaviour of all time. But yeah, so recent consumer behaviour I think is really helpful to think about, because that's something that I found really interesting, was who found us through Google and what words were they using, and that helped me to realise what they were searching for that led them to us, and to try and make that a more direct experience. So it's just a kind of way of imagining how people are going to interact with your idea, your brand, your business. Is ultimately somebody out there is going to Google search for you. So who are they, and why are they searching for you? What do they need? And then what are they going to find if they search for you at the moment by putting in those keywords about you? Who else is going to come up? That'd be helpful.
So now we have to go on to the kind of nitty gritty of any application, is about the management of the project. And this is probably where, we are getting close to dinner time, and if everybody's going to fall asleep, this is probably the bit where it's going to happen. So I do apologise, but this is the necessary part of what we need to do. When we're writing an application for funding, or if we are going for finance in any way, we need to think about how we present that so that it is de-risked to the people who are going to give us some money, because quite often we'll be asking for a fair amount of money, and quite often that might be public money, or it's if it's not public money, it's obviously the private money of people who really care about where it goes. So we need to make sure that we present to them in our narrative that we have thought about the risks associated with our project or our idea and how we're going to manage those. So risks really is just literally about thinking what might go wrong. Usually, if I was looking at an application, and I'm sure Rachel will come in here as well, but we would be looking at a project or an applicant or the person who's applying for funding is thinking about the project management risks. Now, risks to project management include things like, what happens if this goes over budget? what happened? How will you stop it going over budget? Have you budgeted really carefully so it's not going to go over budget in the first place? Have you put contingency money in? Have you thought about what happens if somebody is ill? If you're a small team, so for my company, there are 3 of us, and we're all pretty critical to how things work. So if one of us goes ill, or one of us has COVID and things have to happen, how are we going to make sure that the project is not adversely affected by that? So the project management, what are you going to do to make sure that the project stays on track, or the idea or the thing that you're doing stays on track? Then there's commercial and delivery risks. So this relates back to your market again, your market. How are you going to make sure that through the course of developing and doing the thing that you're doing, that there is a need in the market and you are satisfying it, that your delivery risks are minimized? So one way that you could do that is to just involve people in the design and development of your idea, to make sure that people are involved in early stages, to make sure that you have done your research and you've got that magic evidence again about the opportunity that your market is presenting for you. So you are making sure that if you are going to run workshops, you can be confident that you will fill those workshops. If you are going to be delivering an app, that people are actually going to sign up and download that app. And how you will make sure that that actually happens. So it might be that commercial and delivery risks are mitigated, for example, through a really nice, strong marketing campaign. It might be that commercial risks are mitigated because you have a project advisory group who represents that market, who come and work with you even at the very early stages, so you know that you're fulfilling what they need and their voices are being heard in your planning. So there's lots of different ways that you can make sure that your project isn't essentially going to fall flat on its arse, for want of a better way of saying it. I do apologise, I'm a bit Cornish sometimes, that's just how we would say it. So that's what commercial and delivery risks need to address. Then you have environmental risks. So for our sustainable businesses on this call, this is really important. You need to, if you're bringing a new product into the world or a new service into the world, and this is the problem that we had with our breast forms, is actually the process of handling our silicone is actually not particularly environmentally sound. So we were managing environmental sustainability in other ways throughout our business, and then creating a waste silicone process throughout that. So the environmental risks are kind of managed. Environmental risks could also be about your influence in general, about your sustainability, about your the policies and practices that you put in place to mitigate anything that you might be doing in the course of your delivery, which might sort of have potentially some sort of negative environmental impact. So that's quite an interesting one to think about, how you address that. Technical risks. For example, if you are an app developer, if you're having a website, if you're using digital scanning technologies, if you're using anything that's kind of techie, then you might have some development within that. You might have some user experience stuff that you need to do to make sure that you are producing something that's going to work. There's nothing worse than somebody saying, oh, I've created this new fancy thing, and then people try and use it and it breaks. Don't let it be breakable. So ways that you can manage it so that when you reach your market, or when you start using it, or when you start delivering the thing, that the risks associated with it not working or breaking or going wrong are minimized. So what can you do? Usually for a technical project, I would expect people to be doing internal testing phases and external testing phases. So trying to break it internally and checking it doesn't break, and then trying to get external people to break it and checking it doesn't break. Things like app developments and bits and pieces, can you make sure that people can log on lots of different phones? Can they access it on their iPad as well as their smartphone? You know, all those different things. Those might be technical risks, and they might be something that you need to consider, but those are very project specific. It might be that your project doesn't doesn't have risks in each of these areas. These are just the kind of main ones that I thought of that I've encountered before. I haven't included it specifically, but under project management risks, we would also think about the risks of using subcontractors. So when you're applying for funding, quite often as a small business, you need to spend some of that money on a specialist person or organisation who might come in and fill a skills gap for you. So that could be a graphic designer to help you with your marketing materials. It could be a website developer to do your website for you. Project management risks, just going back because I forgot to say it, include the management of your subcontractors, because it's really important when you're outsourcing a piece of work that they are equally reliable to do the thing that they say that they're going to do. And there are ways that you would say to your funders, this is how I'm managing this. I know that I can't do this myself. This is the subcontractor that I might like to use, or this is my plan for getting this service brought in. And this is how I'm going to manage it to make sure that it is delivered on time and on budget. So that is part of project management as well. I get asked about subcontractors quite a lot, and I forgot to say it in that section. There we are.
Great. Thanks, cool. Sam. Just another observation. It might feel quite vulnerable to put down risks, like in a way you might feel like you don't want to be telling somebody that there's loads of risk associated with your project. As an assessor, I would be really suspicious of any project that didn't have risk associated. If somebody was saying, oh yeah, there's no risks, I'd feel that you hadn't been thorough and that you didn't know how everything works. There's always a risk.
There's always a risk. There's always a risk, but the risks are managed. And this next section of how we construct our narrative is how to identify those risks, but then how to respond to that effectively. So your funder isn't going to go, oh my God, oh no, oh gosh, that's too much. You want your funder to be really confident that you have looked at everything you're going to do and understand it really holistically. So again, you're not giving them an opportunity to pick holes in things or to think about something that is it might be obvious to you, but it won't be obvious to them. So you can identify those risks, but then what we're going to talk about is how you manage those. So we're just going to take a minute. Can you just spend 1 minute writing down what might go wrong in your project? What are your biggest risks that might interrupt the delivery of your project or your service or whatever it is that you're trying to seek funding for? Your idea, what are the biggest risks to your idea not being able to be delivered? So we just spend a minute or so writing down some notes about that, if we can.
So a question from Malka about the canvas. Is there a question specifically about risks in applications? Oh, this is about yes, definitely. There is usually a question about risk. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say always, and then I hesitated because I haven't seen all.
Yeah, most of them are. Yeah, most of it will say risk, or it will say project management, your project management strategy. But if it says project management strategy, it's still asking you about risk. Yeah. So yeah.
And if it's talking about how you will deliver, you will be delivering in a way that will be agile. You will be ready to respond to risks. Yeah.
Yeah. Risk is a big thing. Excuse me. Okay. Your commercial risks. I've just looked down at Emmanuel on my screen. Hi, Emmanuel. And I'm just thinking of commercial risks. Something that we came up in our breakout group is actually the risk of competitors or other provision. So actually a commercial delivery risk might be that somebody else ups their game. So for Emmanuel's idea, there are other ways of solving that problem if somebody else suddenly tailors their solution that's already existed and well established and kind of goes, oh, we could fulfill that better, then that also is a commercial delivery risk posed by your competitors or your alternative ways of solving that problem. And I've just thought about that. So it's another angle maybe to think about.
Yeah, I thought about that.
You did.
But I suppose if I just look at other companies in other places, there's always imitators, such as, but it's about becoming the market leader, essentially.
It is. Yeah.
And I understand that now. So don't care really what everyone else is doing. If I do this right, then it shouldn't really matter.
Exactly. And that's absolutely right. And that's how you would mitigate against that risk. But yeah, sorry to pick on you. Just popped in my head.
Getting picked on, so.
Cool. All right. So that's risks. I'm going to move on because we don't want to dwell on the negative. So now we're going to talk about the management of those risks. How can you manage and address those risks? So this is the key point, really, is to have your management plan. And again, this explicitly is asked in quite a lot of funding applications that you will find. How will you manage or address your risk? What are you going to do to stop that risk being a business critical risk? So it could be that you are going to make sure that your marketing is really, really good, that your market, your primary market, really do know about you and why you are different and your unique selling points. It could be that you have a really experienced project manager on your team who's delivered a lot of projects before, and then they will make sure that your project is being delivered and addressed correctly. It could be that you've got timelines and milestones particularly important for project funding, and that goes back to our beginning part where we talked about SMART targets in your idea, because having a nice time frame where you have got contingency time planned in, but you have specific milestones, can help you to say, we're going to manage the risks of this project by doing it in bite-sized chunks so that we know that we're going to achieve this, and then we're going to move on to this, and this is the time frame we're going to do that in. It makes it feel like it's a sure thing that it's going to be delivered, because you're really like addressing some of those issues that people might find within your project planning. You need to think about who's in charge. So in your management planning, you need to think about who is going to be the person who's accountable for delivering the thing that you're going to deliver, and how are you going to make sure that you're presenting that is the right person, that they have the skills and the attributes to do what they're going to do, that they're the best person to deliver the thing that you're asking for funding for. Because a lot of the funding applications and the funders that you might deal with, they want to know that this is they're putting their money in a safe pair of hands. So if you have a good management structure, you've had people who are really confident in delivering what they're going to deliver. That's really important. How will you monitor your progress? So again, we talked about those SMART targets. If you've got an idea and it is specific and measurable, then you've already addressed that, because you've talked about how you would measure it. You can tick it off. I'm going to do 8 sessions, blah. Then you can tick it off, and you know when those are going to be, because you might have your project milestones that say we'll deliver 5 sessions by August, and then the other 3 by December, and that's how we're going to do it. And so by August you could say to your funder that yes, we've done that, blah. So it's an easy way of just sort of breaking things down to make sure that you're presenting a narrative that shows that you are in control of exactly what's going on and exactly how you're going to do it, and exactly what outputs and outcomes are going to be achieved from doing your project. How will you measure your success? So when you get to the end of your project, or when you're delivering at particular milestones, how are you going to ensure that the outcomes or outputs that you've planned are actually the ones that you're delivering? And we did mention really briefly earlier about unintended outcomes. Now, those are really awesome, because sometimes your project does much better than you thought it was going to. Or, for Rachel's example with the sustainability awareness, it might be that each of those people, those 11 people that went on the workshop, or the 12 people that went on the workshops, then went off and told one other person in their organization about sustainability. So actually the number of people who learnt about sustainability was doubled. And that's that might be an unintended outcome, but that could be measured. The feedback from those organizations could be measured if that is identified. So the measurement of success needs to be fairly flexible, because you need to allow for those kind of things, but you also need to be really presenting an air of confidence to your funders to say, this will be awesome. If you give us this money, this will make something really wonderful happen. And we're going to prove to you that something really wonderful happens. And this is the way we're proposing to do it. All right.
I can,
got a bit excited there, sorry.
No, I feel it, yes. Woo!
Management plans, woo!
Yeah, actually, doing the management plan with you is like as you were speaking, I was just thinking, these funding applications, they do hopefully lead you to finance, but even if they don't, they help you have a plan. It's like writing a business plan. Like, I remember having like a light bulb moment where I was like, oh, a business plan isn't just like a thing I have to do. It's literally my business plan. Like, it's a plan for me to make my business work. Okay. And these things are the same. You know, you're basically creating a framework within which you have already thought about the things that might go wrong and thought about how you'd mitigate those things, so that when and if they do, you go, oh, okay, well, this, you know, that subcontractor didn't work out. Well, I've already researched subcontractors, and I've got a second person in the pipeline that I'm going to bring in. I can see that Arthur's got his hand raised. Do you want to quickly ask a question, Arthur?
Yes, thank you, Sam and Rachel. That was very informative. Could you, any thoughts of how we could apply this management plan to an agile-driven project management? Because we are working on building a new AI system that is almost impossible to manage using like the traditional milestone-based approach. Any thoughts how I could really find the right balance between providing the potential investors with a sense of confidence that we know that what we are working on, at the same time making sure that we remain flexible and we assess the risk and respond to them in the most agile and a quick way.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, that's a really interesting question, and I over the lockdown periods I did run a design project which used AI to sort of measure boobs, basically, as you would expect from me. Everything's about boobs and breast cancer. I'm sorry. So we did one of those, and we still were able to we still did a Gantt chart, we still did a project management plan because we got funding from Innovate UK. So we still had those definitions, those work package. You'll understand speaking if I talk to you about work packages. For everybody else, I wouldn't worry too much if it sounds a bit alien, but for a tech-based project you still might need to break it down into work packages. Even if the deliverables or the outputs are not necessarily clearly defined, you can still show where those iterations are. So if you're training your AI systems, you can still show that there is a development and there is progress there. But also to say in your plan, we're operating under an agile management system, and this is overseen, but also to show that there is the people in your team are able to effectively work in an agile system. And that brings us really nicely to team and resources, which is the next one, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So yes, it is still possible to have a more open-ended or less structured approach to your project management plan, but to manage the risk. But it's the way you communicate it, and the way you communicate it is to make sure that you don't hide any risks, you explicitly address them in your narrative, and you talk about the ways in which you deal with that. So our team are experienced in working in agile processes. We have these design iterations, we have regular update meetings, We have planned dependencies, but we aren't planning the deliverables necessarily, or the outputs, because this is how we're working this project. But this is still going to be the overall outcome. This is where we're going to get to. We're going to move perhaps from technology readiness level X to technology readiness level Y, if that's the kind of language you're talking in. So all of those things would help to de-risk, in my view. Your team and resources bit is going to be really important for that, because to show you've got developers and tech specialists in your team that are used to delivering in that kind of environment, that would also de-risk it for me.
I love the answer. Thank you.
Is that okay? Thank you.
And
everybody else who's not developing AI things, that probably sounds a bit gobbledygook, but it's fine. I know what I mean. So that's kind of your management plan. We don't, if anybody is interested, we can talk about Gantt charts and things later on, and Rachel can help you with those, because we did those together. They're quite fun, but they're not as scary. A project management approach is not as scary as it sounds. It's actually, as Rachel said, it is a really nice tool to kind of think about how all these things knit together. So I'm just going to give you a minute to write any notes that you have about how you will manage your project, particularly if you've identified one or two risks. Are there specific things that you can do when you're delivering your project, or people on your team that you might have that help to mitigate against those risks? So just a quick minute. How will you manage some of those risks? And is there anything else in project management that would make your narrative a nice, strong narrative? And if you don't know what to write for your risks, it's always a time slippage and budgets.
Yeah. And actually, well, Malka's just raised another question. Actually, I had a note from a question from you earlier, Malka, which I can just answer really quickly, which is about word counts. I would suggest always sticking to word counts. Like, don't write more.
I was thinking more writing less. If you're saying to be concise, do you need to fill the space because they're giving you that option? No. Okay, so it's okay to be short.
It's okay to be short, but you need to use your words effectively. So, if you've got things to say and you've got the word count to say it, you need to craft it appropriately, because if you're too short and sweet, you might not be giving the full picture that you could be giving. So when we get to the second canvas, if we get there, that will be a quick one, I promise, but that actually has a note beside it that says reality check. Now, reality check is a really good thing to do, whatever you're doing. Get somebody else to read your form for you, because it's really easy to get really absorbed in your idea. You know you can manage this. You know what your risks are. But is that really coming across to the reader? You can't guarantee that the person assessing your application for funding is going to know very much about you and the operations that you're working in. So if you have some spare word count, it might be just worth having a look through and seeing, is there anything that I need to just explain a little bit more fully? But it's fine to be under word count. Don't be over word count, because quite often it just won't accept it.
Yeah.
Or they won't read it.
Yeah. And then also another question, Malka had a second question, just remind me of her earlier question, which was about small teams and the risk of illness and sharing some solution ideas. It's probably relevant to a lot of people, actually, because I think most of us have small teams. And yeah.
So the small team and the illness issue is basically a time management issue. So what you need to think about is the way that your team communicates with each other. So are you regularly updating your team members about the progress of each and every other team member? So that if somebody is off ill, then the rest of the team can actually step in and understand exactly where that team member got to in the progress of their tasks, and then that can be reallocated. So there's a communication de-risk there. If you've got active communication tools, if you're using Trello, if you're having weekly team meetings or design sprints or whatever, morning meetings, whatever you do to make sure that that communication is upheld, that helps to de-risk against that. But also having the time frame, the contingency time within things. So if things slip by a week because somebody's off ill, that isn't business critical, that you're still able to meet your milestones.
Yeah.
I was thinking more specifically, if let's say I'm hiring a teacher to run a class, and because I'm only doing a small, business, if the teacher then falls ill, would a way to mitigate risk be that you'd say you delay the class, for example?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That would be sufficient to say.
You have strong communication channels with the people that are signing up for that class, so you're easily able to reschedule. I mean, or you could move it online if you.
Exactly.
There's different ways of managing that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think also if you put in T's and C's, that what would happen if, so that you've communicated to anyone involved that you're aware, again, that you're aware of the risk, and if the risk happens, the class will be delayed, the class will be recorded, whatever it might be. And the other thing I just wanted to throw into the mix there is keeping a clear record of your contacts, so that for example, I have just recently started an exercise of making sure that anyone I'm talking to about a project doesn't just live in my email, but that there's an external record of I'm speaking to all these people about this event, and there's a spreadsheet that has a list of what they're doing at the event, what their email address is, and what their phone number is. So if I am suddenly out of the office, that document is in Google Drive, and Jess or Tolu or my colleague Alice, who's away on holiday, so she's done the same exercise, has left information so that they can send and be like, right, who's going to be at Forest Fest next week? Let's just check in with them, let them know Rachel's away or whatever. So yeah.
Communications is really key to project management, actually, and having that line and those internal processes for sharing information. If you've got those in place, then you're fine. It's all fine. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one, because that also really nicely brings us to team and resources. And I think this is one of the things that we're addressing here. So your team and resources, so these three boxes on your canvas are all related. There's little arrows going between them to show they need to be interlinked with each other. So your team and resources, who do you need to make this thing happen, and what stuff do you need? What resources do you need to make this thing happen? So do you need additional staff? Are you asking for money because you need additional staff to fill those skill gaps? Are they going to be subcontractors, or are they going to be new hires? Are you trying to cover some of your core staff time? So the time within your normal PAYE hours that's going to be siphoned off if this is a particular project that you're doing. And again, when we went onto the first slide, we talked about what core activities were and some of the issues that you might find with funding them through grants. So just refer back. You need to think about what your funding mechanism is, where you're looking for that money, and is that eligible? Okay, but just to be clear, sometimes core staff time, if it's dedicated to a particular project, that is eligible. Subcontractors, external advisors, or project groups. So a project advisory group might not be a paid organisation. They might be a group of volunteers that are going to sit with you and help you from day one. For example, if it's a tech project, if it's a techie thing, they could be the people who are testing the app at different phases, or testing out the AI stuff and how it's developing. They could be a group of external professionals. It could be a group of teachers. It could be whoever. But are they going to be instrumental? Because if they're there, does that help to mitigate against the commercial risk of it not working? If you have these little focus groups, if you have a project advisory group, does that help to deal with one of your risks? If it doesn't, then they don't need to be there. But if it would be useful and it helps to deal with the risk, then it's great. How does the staff that you have, your core staff, does that help to deal with some of the project management stuff that we've identified? So who's in charge of that internal communications? Who's making sure that those meetings are chaired and monitored? Who is being aware of what tasks are where, what deliverables need to happen? And is that person an experienced project manager? Have they done this before? Because if they've done this before, then it's great. If they haven't, then that's fine. But have they done training? Do they have a mentor? All of those things, really, really quite cool to think about. Just to go back to your risks, look at your risks. What are the key risks, and do the team and resources, does that help to mitigate against those risks? Do they link together? Because if all of these things kind of link and cross-reference to each other, then you're giving your grant assessor a lot of a strong foundation to make their decision on. It's going to sound really, really good. And then what do you need to make it happen? Do you need to buy materials? Do you need to buy a load of iPads and iPad pens for a digital art class? Do you need lots of pens and paper? Do you need equipment, more tech stuff? Do you need a digital scanner machine? Do you need the space to deliver your thing? Do you have to rent rooms to deliver in community centres? Do you have to move into a new office? Do you need some storage space for a warehouse to put all your stuff in? Do you need, is that kind of thing, are those expenses that you need to cover or that you're trying to cover within your budgets for your project? What do you need to make your thing happen? Okay, and then I've put just a couple of notes to the side about the risks and about the management approach, because if all of these tell a consistent story, so if you've identified a risk but we haven't then addressed it or mentioned it again anywhere in team and resources or in the management, then we're a bit in trouble. So it all needs to kind of map together, all of those three boxes. So if you can just take a moment, unless Rachel's got something to chime in with, but we could, if you just take a moment to answer those questions. Who do you need to make your thing happen? And what kind of things do you need to make it happen? What kind of expenses are you considering that you might have to make this thing a real thing, make it a reality? Okay.
It's interesting because it sort of feels a bit daunting and overwhelming, but actually when you start doing it, it makes it more real. Like you think about like, oh, actually, yeah, how do I, you just kind of have to walk through like, okay, yes, well, I'm going to do these webinars. So, God, I need to have my Zoom account done. And oh yeah, I need to like make sure that there's someone else on the call with me in case my internet goes down. And who's that going to be? And are they trained in Zoom? And, you know, like you sort of, but then it becomes real. So you're like, well, I can do it. You can visualize it.
Can visualize it. So this is if you can visualize it as the project leader, then your narrative is getting stronger and stronger, which means that hopefully your assessor or whoever you're asking for money is going to be able to visualize it too, without thinking, oh gosh, how's that going to work? How's that going to work? They're just going to see that it will work. They will be able to visualize it if you can visualize it. And I think that's the main key. So putting these things in. So team and resources, we were asked earlier about what specifically appears on an application form. I'm not sure whether team and resources actually appears very specifically in the way that I've said it here. It does in quite a lot of them, but in others it would be a more of an implication or part of the whole project management question. But I have separated it because I think it's really important, because this now relates to how you cost your project as well. So if you don't have a really firm grip on the team and resources, then you don't have a firm grip on the management plan, you don't have a firm grip on the risks, and you certainly don't have a firm grip on the costs. So all of these things are all, this part of the canvas is all really intertwined together. Team and resources is really interdependent on this next bit, which is your costs. Now I've put check your eligibility, because some costs that you will incur in your team and resources will be eligible for your funding, depending on which funding route you're going, but some of them might not be, but that doesn't mean that they don't need to be accounted for. So you might still need to think about all those staffing costs, even though you can't necessarily claim all that back in the fund that you're applying for. It's still good to have a handle on it. What are the costs, those resources that you've listed, how much will that cost for you to get those? And are they eligible in the funding route that you're looking for? And your team, the team that you need, those subcontractors, the skills that you might have identified, those people within your core team that might need to be redeployed to run this project in some way and might incur a staff or labour cost. What are the costs of of them, their time, the subcontracting brief that you want somebody to live, how much is that going to cost you? And if you've mentioned somebody in the team, or you've mentioned something in the team and resources that hasn't then got costs against it, that would raise red flags. So again, just link back all of those boxes together, the team and resources, the risks, and the management plan. And are you being honest with yourself that you're accurately costing what and who needs to be around to make this thing happen? And then we need to consider your contingency, and contingency is a key part of your risk management and your project management plan, because with a bit of contingency in your budget, you can have that little bit of flexibility, because particularly with a grant funding or a funded project, if you don't really want underspend, but you really don't want overspend either, because that would cause you some trouble. That would cause you to be out of pocket. So you need to think about, if the project slides, if it's a long project, if it's 2 years, have you left enough wriggle room there in your budgets? Not just your budgets, but your time frames as well. Have you got enough wriggle room? But particularly here, because we are talking about costs, have you added a bit of contingency into your budget? Okay. And that contingency might have to be money that you find from elsewhere as part of your match funding. It might not be something that you can ask your funder for, but it needs to be considered as part of your project management approach and your approach to de-risking. Okay. So
can I just do a clarification point on match funding?
Yeah.
So match funding is external funding that you raise to meet the full cost of your project, that you're telling the people you're asking money for that you're going to bring in. So they bring in X and you match that with Y by your own work elsewhere. So lots of grants will say they'll fund up to, let's say, 70% of the cost of a project, and you, the applicant, are required to bring in the other 30%. And that can sometimes be in kind, and sometimes it can be required to be financial cash money. Was that fair, Sam? Is that a good sum up?
That is absolutely correct. Yes, that's lovely. Thank you.
So a quick question here. Does that money have to be personal money, or can be, for example, raised from angel investors and then show that we have received this?
Yeah, so it can come from other places, but you do need to be careful. For example, if you have, I know the European money is going now, but if you had a pot of money that was a grant from a European fund, like an ERDF or ESF fund, and then you were trying to match that against other money that you had already secured against another ERDF or ESF fund, that wouldn't be allowed. So you do have to be careful where your match funding source comes from, but usually private money is the best way. So if it's private investors, then that's usually fine to match against public money. I take it, Rachel, we're not going to go into de minimis rules and all that kind of rubbish right now, but there is no, so ignore that.
Yeah, it just gets,
but there is,
yeah. We can stay at the end and go into it if people want to ask about that stuff. But I think just being mindful that if you're trying to get money from, but basically what the government has to be mindful of where it puts money, right? They need to sort of say that they've made wise decisions. And they don't really want to double fund. So if you're taking money from public pots, just be mindful about which pots those are and how they interrelate with each other potentially within governmental departments, and try not to double up. Yeah.
So you can't necessarily fund the same project from two different pots of public money, so you need to almost have that other investment. So usually your match funding would come from an external source, which is a private source of funding, like you said, like an external equity funder or whoever, or it comes from your profits or money that's already within the company, or it could be like a director's loan to the company to help to cash flow it. We've talked about match funding, but I do notice there's something that I have forgotten, which is to talk about the cash flow of a project, which is related to the cost. So sometimes for some funders, you have to pay out the costs of what you're doing and then claim that money back through a claims process. So you might have to show that even in the short term, you've got enough money to pay for the project in full, even though you're going to claim it back later on. So that might be a difficult hurdle initially, and it might mean that you might either have to borrow some money to cover that, or you might have to find some from external sources. But again, it depends on your funder and what their funding rules are. And if that's going to be a problem for you, then you can make sure that you're looking for funds that have that might have some upfront capital, that they kind of give you the money first before you start, or that you've got the resources in place where you can spend and then claim as you go. And that's something to just think about the cash flow of your project. But I wouldn't worry too much about that at this phase, because at the moment what we're just doing is really pinning down what we're asking for and how we might ask for it. So yeah. So I've put a little note at the very bottom, and it says, does it sound reasonable? And we talked about costs and benefits and impacts. Now, I think in this call, there's a lot of impact driven businesses here. There's a lot of people with ideas that really are about benefiting the environment, benefiting people, benefiting the planet as a whole, and finding ways to impact to make people's lives better. So one thing to think about when you're looking at your costs of your project is to actually think about the reasonableness of the costs. So you are quite often asking for public money, as Rachel said. Does the cost of the project sound reasonable for the amount of people who will benefit from it, or for the amount of future impact it will have, or for the amount of outcome for the environment, or for the people that you're working with? So does it seem reasonable to you to spend that kind of money to do this thing? And it's just worth having a little think about that. I've just put a little cost calculation below that I did with a project recently, where I just asked them to think about the amount of money they wanted to spend and divided it by the number of people who would benefit, and just think about that spend per person, and if that sounded like it was reasonable, because it was a small amount of beneficiaries for a really big number of a big amount of money. How much of a long-term impact would that have on those individual beneficiaries? I mean, would it be better, rather flippantly, I did say to the client, would it be actually better if you just gave each of those 5 people 10 grand rather than spending 50 grand on this project? And they went, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that. You know, would that have impacted their life better? So just to have some sort of step back and have a little think about the cost benefit, the return on investment that you might get. Is the impact from doing your project going to be worth the money? And if it is, can you make sure that you're saying that when you talk about the cost of your project, you are linking that back to your idea, your targets, your market, and the impact that you're going to have on that market to show that this is going to be value for money? All right, that's easier said than done, isn't it? I know, I'm sorry.
Well, yes, but it's also worth doing. I've got a feeling that maybe we should have a break now, and then when we do the second section, which will just take an hour between 12 and 1 or so, we'll be wrapped up by 1. But I think when we're thinking about the funding that we're going to go for, that's when we are, this equation really comes into its own. Arthur had a question in the chat about equity. You know, we're looking at grants, but then we are also looking at financial investment. For a grant, you might want to say, well, the return on investment is the impact that we're going to have and the good work that we're going to do and the ripple effects from that and the financial rewards as well, you know, but it might be wrapped up in that. But if you're looking to talk to an investor, you need to be saying, oh, the return on investment is going to be X in year 1 and X, you know, by year 5, and we're all going to make loads of money. So so I think that this is an important equation when you're thinking about which route you're going to go down. So yes, we have a special guest with us this morning. I have been aware for quite a long time now of Bethnal Green Ventures, And we have a representative from BGV with us this morning. John Sue is with us from BGV and is going to tell us about BGV. I actually came across Bethnal Green Ventures through the Tech for Good platform and the meetups that are hosted by Tech for Good. And through that became aware of BGV and the funding opportunities that they offer, which, as I say, John Sue will go into in a bit more detail. But I thought it might be really useful just to hear very quickly from a funder about what you're looking for when people are applying to Bethnal Green Ventures, and some of the points that you look for in terms of alignment. How do you assess whether an application really aligns with your mission for the business? And this session is, we're looking at filling in grant funding as a wide spectrum of business opportunities. So this, you can take this canvas and apply it to anything. But obviously, from my perspective, from an Our Pledge perspective, and through this programme in particular, we're looking at funding opportunities for sustainable or social impact, so environmental or social impact businesses. All businesses welcome, of course, but so that's a key thing for us. So I just wanted to bring John Sue in to talk about BGV, and then we'll have a quick sort of 10-minute spotlight on you, and then we'll move back to the narrative. So welcome, John Sue. Hi.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. John Sue from BGV here. I'm senior partner and I lead our fundraising for our investment vehicles at BGV. So as Rachel, thank you for setting the scene. I'll be talking about from a venture capital tech for good investors perspective. And I don't think we have time for questions at the moment, but if you have further questions around BGV, please do look at the website bethnalgreenventures.com, where you can find a lot of resources. And if you ever wanted to talk to a member of our team, particularly the ones that look after what we call our deal flow, which is entrepreneurs applying for investment from BGV, you can reach out to my colleagues there. So essentially, Bethnal Green Ventures is Europe's leading early stage tech for good venture capital firm, which is a bit of a mouthful. What that means is that we invest in for-profit businesses that are looking to create positive societal impact while also generating returns for their investors. Maybe it's useful if I take a little step back, but essentially, venture capital firms itself have investors that we call LPs, limited partners, and we manage their capital to be able to generate positive financial returns for them. So the business model of a venture capital firm is essentially based on viable financial returns to our investors. And the way we run our businesses and make money is we take a certain amount, we take a management fee, which is a tiny amount of the capital we are managing, but also roughly 20% of the returns that our investments generate. Anyway, so seeing that we don't have much time, I'll just leave it that. At BGV, what we mean by tech for good is tech and tech-enabled products and services intentionally built to be accessible and affordable to positively impact millions of lives globally. So this is essentially the reason we say tech and tech-enabled is we don't really look at only tech innovation, but also new business models that use tech for the dissemination of that product or solution, for example. So that includes, platforms or mobile apps, et cetera, So it's not only, building something from scratch or coming up with a completely new software business. We invest under 3 very wide impact themes, which are a sustainable planet, better society, and healthy lives. And under those impact themes, we tend to invest in a lot of different technology verticals. So, hardware solutions or solutions for agriculture, quite a few digital health solutions, both for direct to customers or for NHS. education technology. So there are lots and lots of different examples that I can give, and I will try and give in a moment to bring this to life a little bit. And where our investment comes in is we are an early stage investor, which in venture speak means that we are pre-seed and seed stage investors. But even when you look at like the early stage investment ecosystem, we are at the earlier end of early stage. Our first investment, we tend to invest in companies that almost never have revenue or have very, very modest revenues. They might not even have the finalized product or service, but they have essentially they have an impact hypothesis, which we find is relatively credible for their stage, and they have some traction, and that word is, you know, vague on purpose, some sort of traction, either commercial traction or user research traction, that whatever particular intervention they came up with might be meaningful in the market, not only as an impact proposition, but as a commercial proposition. What I'm trying to say is they're building something that they can sell to someone. So we're looking for businesses, they're looking to sustain themselves as a business. They might take venture capital funding up to a certain stage, and the idea with the model is that they will keep finding it, so there'll be a point where we can exit our investment. But at the end of the day, we're looking for businesses that can be sustainable because they're building something that the market needs. So one thing when we think about impact is, Rachel mentioned that you were talking about ROAS, etc., just before the break. And I guess one thing we always say at BGV is we don't believe that there is a discount on impact businesses. We believe in doing good and doing well at the same time. These things are absolutely not mutually exclusive, which means that from our investments, we do expect a financial return, while them generating positive impact outcomes. And the venture capital model itself is the reason it's called venture capital is it's a high risk asset class. So we do expect, if I'm being honest, the majority of our investments to either generate very modest returns or even no returns at all. This is just completely built into the financial model of the majority of venture capital funds, particularly the earlier ones. But one thing that we've seen is, so we've been investing into Tech for Good since 2012. So it's going to be our 10th year this year that we'll be celebrating. And we've invested in more than 150 companies. Thanks, Rachel. 80 plus, maybe 85 plus, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, are still alive. And I would say that 15 to 20 of them are on track in terms of the sort of exceptional financial returns that we would like to see in our portfolio. So what would happen if you wanted to get investment from BGV? We have every 6 months we open applications. So one thing we believe is that there needs to be transparency in venture capital. So we run an open application process. The first stage is filling out an application form, which is accessible on our website. We then we tend to get roughly 350 applications per cohort. We then assess it as BGV team members, our mentor and partner network, and we shortlist 40 to 50 companies for a face-to-face or Zoom interview. And after that, we tend to make 10 to 12 investment decisions. And what we look for is an impact business that would be able to grow their business in line with their impact. Okay, so let me try and put an example to that. One of our portfolio companies called Doctor, one of our very first investments actually, they have an appointment scheduling software platform that they sell to NHS trusts. So very oversimplifying it, the more trusts that they sell to, the more revenue they generate, definitely, but also the more patients are able to directly benefit from the platform by, reducing missed appointments or like being able to being able to schedule appointments way quicker than if it wasn't on that particular software system. So what they do is they are able to generate positive health outcomes by virtue of growing their business. Or another one would be a company called Organize, which is essentially a platform for workers to campaign and create better working conditions for themselves. So the more workers that use the platform, the more workers that subscribe, that is more revenue and more commercial growth for the company, but also better bargaining power and more campaigns won on that platform. So this is what I'm roughly trying to, this is roughly what I mean when I say, impact and commercial growth go hand in hand. What else? With the sort of businesses we look for, they would have to be tech or tech enabled. They would have to be for profit. And the final thing would be we're looking for direct impact. So one example to illustrate that would be we've had, I think it's not as common now, but particularly in the last 5 years or so, in the first 5 years of BGV or so, we used to get a lot of applicants that were generating platforms for charities to streamline their processes, for example. So in our minds, that sort of solution would have indirect impact in the sense that that's enabling a charity who then can have impact for their beneficiaries. And this is, by the way, this is contentious, so you can get different opinions from different people. But for us, what we're trying to see is if you took that product or service out of the equation, would there be a gap in the ecosystem? And if so, then that's probably a more preferable investment solution for investment proposition for us, just because it would then be easier to claim our what we call additionality, which is what difference our money makes in the grand scheme of things. I jumped around a little bit, but hopefully this was useful. Rachel, is there anything else that you would like me to touch upon?
No, I think that was really useful. I'm so conscious that we don't have very much time, so thank you for kind of giving us a whistle-stop tour. I mean, several things. I really wanted to make everyone on the call aware of BGV, because I think it's so interesting what you do, and that you are, you're investing in tech for good. I think it's really interesting what you said about seeing profitability and impact as going hand in hand. And that's something that I really had to get my head around, which was that I can be proud of my business making money because by me being successful and the business being successful, that enables us to do better work and to keep doing good work. So sometimes there's a sort of sense that within sustainability or social impact, there's a discomfort around thinking about profits. But actually, when you're putting those profits back in, that brings me to one specific question that I know has come up, which is around social enterprise. And some people have said, it's tricky as a social enterprise, I can't get investment. Do you have from BGV a perspective on the types of business company that you invest in? Mm-hmm. Does it matter if somebody's a KIC, for example, a community interest company? Sure.
So we invest in companies limited by shares. There's a number of reasons for it, like the first one being practicality, if I'm being honest. With KICs, we did invest in KICs, but it creates a lot of complexity and overhead for both us and the companies. Like their mission locus particularly, it can become a problem down the line. And the other thing is, because we are venture capital investors, we favor the easiest UK entity for other investors to be able to come in at later stages. So if the company wants to attract investment from different type of parties, we find that, the limited by shares is just the most straightforward way of doing so. So that's why, and by the way, the third reason being, one of the funds we manage is a fund that is tax incentivized for our investors. It's an SEIS and EIS fund, if anyone is familiar with those terms here. And for that, KICs can create a problem for our investors to claim their own tax reliefs. But again, that's like a technicality. I think the biggest one I think any entrepreneur should keep in mind is what will be your main source of funding? So do you expect it to come from like I don't know, like a charity that will require you to be a kick, or have or do you want to attract more venture capital investment like us? I think like that would when you're setting the company up, like those are the things to think ahead, just so that you don't encounter problems down the line. I do want to add that we do have responsible business ethics that we want the companies to adhere to, so that goes into their articles of association, so that there is a certain element of our ethos being reflected in the company in a way. And oops,
don't know what that was, something outside, sorry.
Oh, that is all right. Yes, and that's actually one of the things that drips down from one of our LPs, which is Big Society Capital.
Great. That is an incredibly perfect segue into the next section of our session, which is looking at all the different, where is your funding going to come from, and making sure that you're not just going for funding because it's there and you need money, because you can then end up sort of shoehorning, being like, oh, I desperately need money, and there's this grant, and I'm going to say, oh yeah, we kind of do this and we kind of do that, and like create your grant application or your application to BGV to sort of misshape what you really want to do to fit the funder, and then you end up with the money, and then you have to do what you said you were going to do. So, but I just want to say thank you so much, John Sue. It's really nice to hear from you, and I know that you were saying that BGV is accessible and you're available for questions and things like that. So we'll share some details after this call with everyone, and you're welcome to hang out with us for as long as you like.
Thank you so much. I just want to sign off with two quick things. First one is around that little feeling of shame around generating profit. I honestly look at it from a very pragmatic point of view. The more independent you can be in terms of generating revenue as a business, the more focused you can be on the impact that you want to create. So, that's my take. And the second one is for you to be aware, there is a lot of pressure on asset managers to be making more responsible investments. So there's more and more money going into impact investment. The ecosystem is growing. So please do consider that the sort of products and services that you're creating are more in demand now. So that definitely, in my view, gives social entrepreneurs an upper hand. Best of luck, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Bye. Bye, John C. Oh, hello, Tilly. Over to you, Sam.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen again. Hopefully, I can do that fairly smoothly.
Just to say, I wasn't sure if John C was going to be able to join us, so it was a nice surprise that she was, but that's why I hadn't quite sort of said anything about her being available. So yes, you going to join in, Tilly?
That it's really useful actually, because it brings us into the final part. You'll all be glad to know the final part, the final push for what we've been doing today, which is funding options and ideas. So at the very, very start of this, we talked about all those different kind of ways that you might raise money, from crowdfunding to equity investment, as we've just heard, or grant funding, but actually thinking about what the most suitable funding routes are for you really gets you to reflect on your narrative and your canvas, and thinking about what you've been doing and all those things that we've talked about today. So the other part of the way to approach this, I would suggest, is the funding alignment exercise. Now, we've just heard from a funder that's talked very specifically about funding alignment. So the key thing is to look at your narrative, to look at your idea and the market and your outcomes and your outputs and the things that you want to do in the world, and then align those to the most suitable funding option. Now that sounds, again, this is one of those things that sounds like really straightforward, that really isn't, because it's massively complicated. But we hope that the way we've been setting this out today and structuring this for you will just help to kind of formulate that in your brains a little bit and help you to get it down on paper so that you can come away from today probably with more questions than answers, but with, you know, feeling a little bit further on than you might have done before. So funding alignment is really important, because if you go to the wrong funder with the wrong narrative, you're not going to get anywhere. You are going to risk wasting your time from working through that application process and spending a lot of time getting involved in that. And you might risk their time as well, because then they're just going to look at your application and they're not going to read it properly, or they're not going to be able to progress it in any way because it's not the right fit. So funding alignment is really important. What needs to happen is your idea needs to be closely matched with the type of funding option that you're going for. And that means not even just identifying whether that's grant funding or equity funding or crowdfunding, but also thinking about who exactly are you going to approach to get that money from. So for grant funding, you have such diverse and massive organisations like Innovate UK that want to fund innovation. And for just to clarify, innovation is usually something that has an intellectual property element to it, something you can register and commercialize. That's usually a good way of thinking about innovation. It's not always, it's not a full definition, but it's just something to think about. But then you also have grant funders that give small local startup grants. You might get an under £5,000 kind of pot of money here and there, which is more based in your local community. Down here in Cornwall, we have a little bit of European funding still left over, so we have little pots of that. Grant funding could be multi-million-pound, multinational Horizon UK innovation and research projects. So there's a lot of scope within those different approaches to the different funders. But what's clear is that each of those funding options has its own different scope and criteria. So the pros and cons of grant funding are different to the pros and cons of equity funding, and the pros and cons of, as we touched on, of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding always seems like a really nice and straightforward way to raise money until you actually do it. And I can see Rachel's smile on her face there, because it's a lot of work. So there's always these different, these pros and cons to think about. So what we've got for you is a funding alignment canvas. I'm going to see if I can bring one up on the screen so we can talk about it all together, which means that I have to find where it is in my notes, which is useful. Right, I've found it. So bear with me and I will show you one on the screen, hopefully. She says, there we are. Okay, so we've all got one of those or access to one, or if you haven't, then Rachel will send you one afterwards. So the funding narrative, there's the options. There we are, showing you the wrong one. There we go. So it says funding options at the top. Can you see that, Rachel? Is that okay? Can you nod?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Right, okay. I've got the right screen. That's a bonus. So it's really important to think about identifying your funding options. So are you going to go for a grant? Do you think a grant is the best fit? Do you think equity funding is the best fit? Do you think crowdfunding is the best fit? Do you think a loan might be the best fit? And then identify the kind of places that you can get that financing from. What you then need to do is look really carefully at the scope and criteria. And we've just had that presentation about equity finance. And it was clear that there were certain hoops that would need to be jumped through, some sort of eligibility. There is the requirement for being a resilient and sustainable business in terms of your financial modelling, so showing that you could be profit making. We talked about the issues with funding the CICs, where the asset lock becomes a problem. But we also talked about for that particular funder about the requirement to have some sort of sustainability or kind of environmental alignment there, because that is a priority of a lot of equity funds at the moment, that they are looking to make positive impacts in the world, and the positive changes and the impact assessments are really actually something they're very keen on. So that gives you some idea as to how to review your narrative canvas. So if you look back at your narrative canvas and you're thinking about the problem that you want to solve and your idea for solving it, and the way that you've structured that, does that actually fit with what your funder is asking for? So the main thing is not to think about putting a square peg in a round hole, but to actually do your research and really dig into those funders that align closely with what you're trying to do. So are there specific charities that might be able to fund your activity that have a mission, vision and value statement that aligns quite closely with yours? Or are there grant funders? Do you know, for example, that you want to protect your intellectual property and you're looking for patents, you're creating something that might be patentable, and then you might think, well, you know, the Innovate UK are very keen on that kind of innovation and intellectual property type businesses, so that might be a really good funder to go for, or a pot of money to go for. So the idea here is to help you to review your narrative canvas almost with a lens to think about your narrative and those potential funding pots, and how to review that in line with the scope of the funder and the scope of your project. So the funding scope criteria, what they are asking for, what they want to fund, and they do tell you what they want, and they make that quite obvious. And if you try and, I was going to swear a little bit then, I was going to say, if you try and bullshit that a little bit, they're going to see it. So excuse my language, but if you try and put your idea into their criteria and it doesn't quite fit, it will be obvious to your grant assessor that you are chasing the money and that there isn't enough alignment there, and you are unlikely to have your application to succeed in it's sort of that's how it was. And actually, when Rachel and I talked about these issues in our kind of warm-up session yesterday, I said it's kind of even worse if you've done that, if you fitted your idea, if you've done that kind of whole square peg and round hole thing, and you've tried to fit your square peg in a round hole, and you've tried to meet all the funding criteria, but it isn't actually what you're trying to do. You've just done that to raise the money, and then you get the money, and then you actually have to deliver it, then you might have created a massive rod for your own back, and that might cause you no end more problems than actually just not having the funding in the first place. So aligning and understanding what your funders are asking for and making sure that's the best fit with what your narrative is the best strategy. And that is the way to approach this, really, when identifying your funding options. Don't be tempted to go, oh, there's a big pot of money over there. If I just move this project, or, you know, compromise on this, or change this slightly, then I'll be more, I'll fit more into their criteria. Try as much as you can to stick to your guns, to think about your strong narrative. If there is elements of it that you can refocus but still maintain your business strategy, then that's a slightly different thing, because that's just about tailoring that part of the narrative to make a strong argument for your funder, because you know what your funder is asking for. But if there is fundamental things that you can't do, I quite often get asked by people who've registered their company as a CIC, who then say to me, oh, but I really want this funding and I can only apply if I'm a limited company, I'll just re-register as a limited company, or all of those things. If there's fundamentally things that you need to change about your structure to align with that funder, then that's not the right funder for you. Don't do it. Don't ever be tempted to chase the money that way. That's kind of a bit harsh, but that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Can I throw something else into the mix, Sam? That
of course.
is about these funding pots effectively exist to enable the owner of the pod to say that they've done good stuff, right? They want to so they have objectives. They want to do X, Y, and Z, and they'll be clear about that. And so you've said this yourself, Sam, so you might phrase this better, but effectively what you're doing is you're a vehicle. If they fund you, you become a vehicle for them meeting their criteria, their objectives. So they're sort of outsourcing their good work to you. So you want to find funders, whether that's a public funder or an investor, or many funders through crowdfunding that all want to achieve the same mission as you do, so that you're all trying to get to the same point. And then that makes it really nice and simple. And so that when you get in with the right funder and you're all working, rowing in the same direction and trying to get to the same end result, that they are going to be on your side helping you get to that point. So that you want it to be a really nice relationship where you're all doing the same thing for the same ends. And so it can be really tempting to go for big pots of money, but actually maybe you just need a small pot of money from the right people who are going to help you in all the other meaningful ways that go beyond cash. So just kind of trying to not be starry-eyed about big pots of money, and be starry-eyed or starry-hearted maybe about like what you want to do from the reason you set up your business, your purpose, is a really important thing. And I'll use an example. I used to work with filmmakers, and everyone wants to go to Cannes. Everyone's like, I'm making a film and I'm going to apply to Cannes Film Festival. And it's like, Cannes isn't, if it's your first film, it's a tiny film and it's not a big, Cannes not going to care about you. They're not going to help you get in the spotlight. But if you've made a little film about a sports club in Waltham Forest and you get into the London Film Festival, you get into the East End Film Festival, they're going to put you on top of the bill because you want to find the people who are going to help to showcase you, shout about you, support you. They're going to be on your side with promotion. They're going to know what you're interested in and what you care about. They're going to be kind of carrying you and doing some of the work with you. So just to say that is really important, I think, because otherwise you could end up spending a really long time doing a funding application for something where you then stitch yourself up and, the money's more of a burden than it is a blessing.
I know you need to hurry, but can I just ask on that note, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How many funding things are you allowed to apply for at the same time? So you're doing
as many as you like, as many as you like. Remember as well, when you do a funding application, you don't have to accept that money until the day that you have to accept that money. So like any contract or agreement, until you sign on the dotted line to say yes, you could apply for anything and everything. It's fine. But you need to be careful about what you accept and make sure that that alignment is correct, because if you are offered something, if you're offered a lot, that's a really nice position to be in, but then you've got to deliver it. As we were just saying, you're always really, from a funding point of view, you're always delivering the strategy of the people that are funding you. You're delivering something for them. Even with crowdfunding, where individuals might give you some money for a Kickstarter campaign, you have to deliver it then, because they've paid you to do it and they're asking you for something in return. So you need to make sure that that is reasonable and achievable for you. And that is actually why we started with the narrative side of things and what you actually want to do in the world and your story and your idea, rather than who's funding what and what are the funding options available and how to write an Innovate UK bid, because that's irrelevant, because what matters the most is what your idea is and how strong your idea is, and then you find the funders after. Once you've
got, they be offended if you turn them down? No, because they don't really, I mean, they're just doing, it's transactional, they're doing their thing. If you turn them down because you say, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't think that my project actually is, or I'm not in a space where I can deliver this, then they'd rather that than have a failed project. A funder will not want a failed project. They don't want to claw money back off you. And don't forget, if you can't deliver what you've said you're going to, and you get offered the money and you take the money, then you might be liable to pay it back. particularly if it's public funding. You have to be really confident that you can do what you said you're going to do, that you're going to deliver what your funder needs you to deliver, and you can do the reporting and you can do all the bits that go along with it, which is why that management and that approach is so vital when you're planning your applications, because you need to be realistic about what you're going to do, and you don't necessarily, if you go chasing funders, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you in the future, which is, again, if you look at your narrative and you do find a funder that specifically has criteria around a certain thing that you can easily emphasize within your application, then that's fine. But there's a difference between emphasizing a particular part of your application and actually sort of bending over backwards to meet funding criteria that you're just not going to be comfortable meeting. Gareth, are you all right?
Just a very quick question from me. Can you begin spending on a project before you've secured funding?
No. Not if it's grant funding. No.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
So for a lot of grant funding, you can't claim for things that you've already spent. For equity investment, it's kind of different because they're investing in the company as a whole, and that's to do more with your core business and your bits and pieces. However, there is some ways to recoup money. Rachel and I were talking about this yesterday as well. So if you've been spending on, for example, research and development activities, then you might be able to recoup some of those costs through R&D tax credits, and you need to speak to your accountant about that. But if you are looking for grant funding specifically to fund elements of a project and you've already done some of that project and delivered it, then it is you cannot then put that into the grant funding bid. But what you can do is use it as evidence to show that your thing is a viable thing, that it's de-risked because you've already started doing it. And then the part of the project you're asking for the money for is the next stages or the next part on. Yeah, the date of your grant offer letter is the day that you can usually start to spend eligible costs from. That's when you start. Grant offer letters are the be all and end all. That's the point you enter into the point of no return, really. Until that point, you still have time to think about, even if they're offering you money, you can still say no until you sign the grant offer letter. When you've signed a grant offer letter, then you are obliged to deliver what you've been told, what you've told them, or what you've said you're going to deliver. And you're likely to be delivering outcomes and outputs that are related to that funder's key mission. And therefore, you'll also be required to report on that, which is why we've been talking about evaluation and monitoring and measuring. Okay.
Cool, thank you.
That was a bit harsh, wasn't it? No, don't do it. But don't, because you get into trouble. Anyway.
Better to be harsh here than for like somebody who's responsible for money to be harsh.
You don't want any clawback. The last thing you want is clawback. So budgeting on these things is really important. Okay, so just to go back to the canvas, because I've just got one more thing I want to say, and then we'll go to questions. I have included something, and it's called a reality check box. The reality check is where you've looked at the funders, and you've looked at the scope of your project, and you think, yes, that's aligned really well. That's definitely the right pot of money to go for. The reality check is the box where you have to leave it a couple of days and come back and look at it with fresh eyes, or better still, ask a grant advisor or somebody, a business advisor, or even somebody in your team or somebody in your family or a friend to actually review it with you and to talk through the narrative, talk through your narrative canvas with that person, talk through your ideas for funding, and just say to them, does this make sense? Is it actually do you think that this sounds like a good fit for funding? Do you think that the cost benefits are going to fit in? Because you need to remember that this is going to take quite a lot of your time to write these applications, and you don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste your funders' time either. So you need to think about, really, is this actually the right thing for me to do, or is it just because it's there? And having a bit of a timeout and a bit of a reality check about that, I think that's really, really important when planning a funding application. Take a step back before you start investing all your time and energy in it. There we are. And always have a backup plan. That's the final thing at the bottom, that you have your best option, you have your next steps, and you set yourself a time frame, but then you always have a backup plan, because it's really hard to get money from people. So as we were just saying with B, you can apply for quite a lot of different things, but obviously if you're doing all of that simultaneously, that's taking a lot of your effort and a lot of your time. If you can identify the best fits first, then you're going to have a much better chance of actually securing that funding and focusing on them, and then looking at backup plans and other options as a secondary thing. That's a more effective use of your time.
Agree. Yeah, and I will actually just say that doing these kind of exercises should also help us all to understand the viability of our business. So ideally, you get some funding, but that funding enables you to become a sustainable business in and of your own right. And and it depends on the scope, because obviously, there are certain business models that rely on equity finance, seed funding, and then VC funding, and so on. Which gets you to the huge scope that you want to be reaching. But if you have a local business that needs a little bit of money to get you over the line, and then you have your workable business model, then that's a really good place to be. So that's another also good outcome. Okay, we've got 4 raised hands and not loads of time, so I'll go in the order that they were raised. Terry, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question, because I've been listening about where the funding is concerned. So I know you have to deliver, let me just put my thing in. I know you have to deliver what you say you're going to do. But the question I'm asking, because if I'm looking for funding, it will mostly be around for machinery or for space. Now, if, for instance, I write up for funding to say I need a specific machine, and I've gotten the funding for that, but then I find out that having another machine would be better than the specific one that I asked for funding about. Could I still go and get that other one that I think would be better for the business? Or do I have to stick to that specific one, which I said I will stick to?
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Yes, that makes absolute sense. So Terry, it depends on who your funder is and what they will allow you to do. So sometimes that would, for some funding, say for example, some of the ESF and ERDF funding that I work with down in Cornwall, if you did that, you would have to apply for a project change, and you'd have to put a project change request in, and you'd have to say, I was going to buy this is what I put in, and I'm actually going to buy this. Quite often, if your other machine is more expensive, if it's going to cost more money, they will say, well, that's tough, this is the money we've allocated you, we will allow you to buy the other machine, but you have to make up the rest of the money, because this is the money you've been offered in your grant offer letter. If you've signed the grant offer letter, then they can hold you to that. And if the grant offer letter specifies that is the machine you're going to buy, then that's the machine you're going to buy. And but you can speak to your funder and have a dialogue with them, because they don't want you to waste their money. They don't want you to waste their money. They want you to get the impact that you have. So it's worth having that conversation. But this is why the planning and your canvases and your costing and things are really important, because you need to do your research really well first to try your hardest not to have that kind of problem, especially if you think, especially before you sign any grant offer letters. If you try as much as you can, but sometimes it is possible to put in what they call a PCR request, project change request, and you can make a change. But if you're spending more than your allocated amount, it's very unlikely that they would then up their budgets to give you the extra money. So it's possible, but it depends on your funder and how they approach things. You'll have to read terms and conditions.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Great, thanks. Emmanuel?
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really useful what you said about funders and stuff. So I suppose my question now would be, I suppose taking into consideration where I am, well, not everyone knows where I am, but just looking back at what my business is, I suppose maybe like looking for a loan might be for some people, a better alternative.
Agreed.
I suppose you may have a bit more control with what you do with the funds that you've actually got, and you just know that you just have to pay it back, and it's quite clear. And
that's right, Emmanuel, that is right. It does give you some clarity, because then you're not, if there isn't a clear funder that aligns with what you're trying to do, then a loan is another option, because you do have that freedom to do what you want. You retain 100% ownership or the majority ownership of your company, if that's what you've got, and you don't have that kind of accountability. The only accountability you then have is that commitment to repayment, rather than the commitment to the kind of the specifics of the delivery and of basically delivering your funders' outcomes and outputs that they want you to deliver. You don't have that with a loan. You just have that financial responsibility. You do need to take financial advice. You do need to speak to your accountant, and you need to make sure that your cash flow and your business model enables you to safely and effectively ensure that you can meet those repayments. Don't take risks with loans and debt finance. Just get advice from your accountant or a financial professional before you enter in those agreements, and do shop around for the best interest rates and the bits and pieces. But actually, I agree, for some people who want to raise some money, a loan is a fairly straightforward way of doing it, and avoids quite a lot of these issues of having to jump through the hoops. However, still being really clear about those questions that we asked on the narrative canvas is really a great basis to start your business model from. And your bank is still going to ask you those types of questions, because they want to know what your possibility is for the future, your business resilience, and how you're going to be committed to repaying that money. So it's still worth thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the British startup loan, what are they called? Yeah, bank, I guess. They do ask for a business plan. And the thing you can do is, if you have, you should be able to put a line in your business plan, your cash flow and your projections for loan repayments. So just being realistic. And this is where you kind of want to maybe be more cautious. Like for equity raise, you might want to be thinking, yeah, we're going to make, it could make this much money, not to be outlandish, don't be, kind of crazy about it, but you want to be, being optimistic. Whereas with a loan, you want to be thinking realistically, worst case scenario, what happens if, and then can I still repay this money if, these risks that I've identified, if they all happen, so just being very, very wise about and very realistic about what each of these options, what the implications are.
Okay, great.
Malka.
Thank you. That was super helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. No worries at all.
Oh, you guys are all really lovely.
Yeah, I'm so glad this is helpful.
Right.
I mean, yeah, just to say, like, whoever you get money from, you're in a kind of a relationship with those people. Right? If you have an investor, they are going to want to be hearing from you. They're going to want to know what you're doing. They're going to want to help you, hopefully. Like all of these people, the funders, the investors, they're going to be on your side. They want, your success is their success, right? So they're going to be in your face, like they want to a certain degree. They're not all like super controlling, but they do want to know what's going on. You are getting into a relationship with somebody. So maybe a loan is a little bit less heavy duty than that, and you just got a relationship with your own bank balance and yourself and your business, and so it's just worth bearing the reality of these situations in mind. Malka, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I want to ask if, like, at the moment, if I've identified a few different funders that align and all the rest of it, and I've applied, and if one of them comes through, do I contact the other funders to pull out of it so that I can use them for a future funding, for the next stage of funding? Because I know some funders don't let you reapply, but can you do that after you've applied? And should you do that anyway as courtesy to save someone reading another application?
Are you double funding? So are you asking all those different funders to fund exactly the same activity?
Yeah, I've asked 3 funders. Yeah.
Yeah, then you need to make sure that you only, most funders would say they can't double fund, they only fund the activity that they're funding. So if you're getting funded twice for it, it's not viable. So if one of those funders is the funder for your project and you choose them and you enter an agreement with them, then you might have to get to a situation where you might have to withdraw from the others. But I would speak to them, and it depends where that ultimately where your funder's pot of funding comes from. So the back trace of it, to think about how that can be used as match funding against each other, because it might be that you can almost do like a stretch project, or you can add another part of added value if you had the amount of funding. But you might have to again do like a PCR, project change request, and go back to the second funder and say, hey, look, actually I already got this part funded, but can I just change slightly what I was asking you for and use it for this instead? And those are conversations that you just need to keep open. If your funders are kind of local based funders and they're more amenable to those kind of things, that's really great. Big national funders, National Lottery Heritage, Arts Council England, Innovate UK, those are all a bit harder to have those conversations with. So it just depends who your funders are. But yes, you shouldn't really have double funding. If you get your funding to do the project, then you can't really get funding again for exactly the same activity, because it's double funding. I mean, you wouldn't be able to claim it. You wouldn't be able to claim the same receipt for the two.
But I'm just wondering whether you should withdraw it, so you've got an opportunity to.
Well, as long as you don't sign a grant offer letter. I mean, it's you only into a commitment with them when you sign the grant offer letter. So if you're careful about managing who you go with and which offer you accept, then you should be fine.
Yeah, I don't think you need to withdraw it necessarily, because that's also added admin for them. And you want them to see your project. And then if you say, oh, gosh, thank you for offering money, I've been actually awarded elsewhere, then that's a nice story for you. They're going to maybe remember you. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't apply again in future, because you haven't taken money from them anyway. As Sam said, it's only when you sign the thing that you're in the agreement with them. So, yeah, don't give yourself extra work. Yeah. And Mo.
And they might not give it to you. It sounds awful, but they might not give it to you anyway.
Yeah. Malka, I was about to say that would be a good problem, having 3 funders.
Let's manifest that. Come on, yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice problem to have. Cross that bridge when you come to it. Be fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm working on a startup called Cup and City, which aim to hopefully eliminate the reliance on single-use coffee cups by providing returnable, reusable cups in a citywide exchange scheme. Right. We have stopped during the COVID, and now getting back with different approach. Our first thinking was, or my first thinking was to start bootstrapping, but now we need technology. I mean, to start with, it was a second phase, but now we need technology. We need funds. I mean, any advice where to find those funders, grants, and would you advise going with grant writers or no?
Right. Okay. So grant writers. So I have views about grant. My views are my own, I should say. My views are my own, and I can only advise from my experience. So I think that it's really important for people to take that step to understand how to write grants for themselves, because if you can write a grant for yourself, then you really do understand your business model, and the whole process of doing that is super valuable. And you might be really crap at it to begin with, but that's all right, because it's a learning process. Nobody's ever really good to begin with. I would recommend, if you want help with grant writing and grant support, somebody who offers a more hybrid model of coaching and support for your grant writing is better than a grantify kind of like, we write your grant for you and we take 10% of however much we raise for you kind of system. I think that the best person, Mo, the best person to talk about your company and your idea and to really sell it is you, because you care about it the most, and you are the most awesome person who will talk about that thing. And that will come across if you pay grant people to write your applications for you. They're quite often, they're not necessarily formulaic because they're quite clever at how they do it, but it's also quite costly, and it's less, I think you get less out of the process. Like as somebody who's written grants for my own business, this is why I'm here talking to you today, not because I'm a grant writer and I'm trained to do it, but because I did it for myself. And it was such a wonderful process that I learned so much from, and it directly led to me being able to secure equity investment, because I could work on my business model the whole time I was applying for the grants. I particularly like Innovate UK as a grant funder for technology and bits and pieces, but they are really hard to get money out of, and there is a very specific technique. But even though there's a specific technique that people like me can help you with, because I've been funded by Innovate UK 3 times now, well, 2 major projects and 1 project extension, so 3 times. And we're a micro business that wasn't employing anybody. We had 0 employees at the time, at the times we were funded by Innovate UK. So there is the possibility. But I am a really big advocate. You can get people to help you write those applications, but I would highly, highly recommend that if you can put that time aside and have a work with somebody who's more of a coach rather than a grant writer, or somebody who's going to really involve you in the process, even if they are ghostwriting for you. So,
Totally got that. Well, during this, this session, I'm also a mentor in a startup initiative here, helping startups as well. And what I can see is just like it makes sense. I have it all in terms of the business plan. It's just it is even easier than pitching to investors, which I've done in a certain period of time. But then, funny that you mentioned Innovate UK. I tried to apply last year. And then, yes, there are some sort of techniques. You feel it is not very straightforward. That's why I was thinking about grant writers. It's just like it will take a bit of more time and energy to understand how it goes. And I do want to try and error there. I do want to wait for another year to learn from my mistakes. So that's what what made me thought about grant writings.
I would echo what Sam's said, and definitely advocate working with somebody who can coach you but not do it for you. So yeah, I wanted to also pick up on another question that you said, where do you find information about these things?
Yes.
So there are several different sort of ways to do that. Obviously, you can do a Google search for things like Innovate UK, and then sign up to their newsletter. There's also Tech for Good. BGV runs a Tech for Good network in the UK. That's an amazing resource for you might want to apply for Bethnal Green Ventures. Actually, it's like an accelerator program.
I know it. I did apply.
Oh, you did apply. Okay, so but then also so I subscribe to, thanks B, nice to meet you. We'll send a follow-up. I know we're going over time now, so if people need to go, we'll be in touch. We'll make sure everyone has these funding canvases. We'll send you information. Just to say, the Elevate program that we're a part of does offer you the opportunity to book a one-to-one for free with myself. So if this is something that you want to do, you can go to wfconnected/elevate and find access to the one-to-ones there, and so we can continue these conversations one-on-one through Elevate.
Would be great. Thank you so much.
Actually, Jess, would you mind putting the link in the chat to wfconnected/elevate? I don't know if you can hear me, but there's also some newsletters like Grants Online that you do have to subscribe to. I think it's £18 a month, but it basically gives you a monthly rundown of every funding body that's got an opening that you can apply for. There are resources. WF Connected is going to have a central resource for funding for businesses in the borough and beyond. there are, so you can sort of search for funding. You can also do things like create a Google alert. So you have a Google alert for sustainable business funding, grant fund, plastics, so that you're getting notifications in your inbox for things like that. Sam, other ways to find out.
I think that's it. Just keep your ear to the ground. Sign up to newsletters. Even sign up to like industry newsletters or things like the sustainable plastics thing is a specific part of the UKRI stuff, and you can sign up. So not everything will always be about funding, but if the funding comes up, it will come there. So the Royal Academy of Engineering is quite a nice one. It's not all about funding, but funding appears there. So there might be some like industry standard newsletters that you can sign up to that might have funding updates attached to them, although it's not always the main content. So those are the kind of ways that you can look for funding. And Mo, I do, and Arthur as well, probably, I do hear what you're saying about Innovate feeling like a closed system, and if you don't know the codes and conventions of how to apply, that's difficult. But there are people like me who sit around and we do tell it. It's not a secret, and it shouldn't be in the remit of paid grant funders. And Rachel knows how much it hurts my brain when I hear people who've spent thousands on grant funders just because they need to know a little bit more about some of the tweaks or tricks that they can do. We shouldn't. People who've had Innovate UK funding, quite often they will explain to you their tips and tricks. There's no reason you can't reach out to somebody, look at people's websites and see who's been funding them. If there's somebody else that you know that you like, and you look on their website and they've got a little funded by Innovate UK symbol, then reach out to them and say, hey, can you talk to me about how your process? They don't need to divulge like classified information to you, but they could tell you something that's really useful, and it's fine. Like, there's a lot of peer-to-peer support that happens that means you don't have to pay thousands of pounds for a grant writer. So it's just that kind of thing. But if you've applied once, that's a really good place to start, because you would have got feedback. And the feedback would be really valuable. Was it a smart grant, Mo? Was it?
No, so maybe I wasn't clear. I did apply for the Green Bethnal Green Ventures, but not.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was about to apply to that, and then I was let me launch my my pilot more than wasting time trying to get a grant that I'm not sure that I'm going to get. So I did not apply at the end of the day. And part of it also is as you said, Innovate UK needs some IP, some patent to be there, and I do not have that.
Ideally, yeah, or something that is commercializable, really. Yeah, some sort of scaling up model or something you can own. But yeah, I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry if I get a little bit on my high horse about grant funding, people who write grant funding for you. So that's just
not at all. Thank you so much, really, Rachel, as well.
Oh, no problem. Leon, can you have the narrative? Yes, I'll make sure that you've got the narrative canvas. I'll resend the canvases. We'll share the presentation. This has been recorded as well, so you'll be able to, if you want to, listen back again. This is a webinar as part of the Elevate project, which is part of the Waltham Forest Business Recovery and Growth Scheme. So really supporting businesses in the borough to come out of the crazy situation that we've all been in the past 2 years and get kind of back to business. And part of the legacy of the programme, I'm really hoping, is that we'll all know each other. So we are all each other's resources, and we're based in Leytonstone. We've got other businesses on the programme from all across the borough doing all sorts of different things. As Sam said, looking at people who are doing similar work to you and seeing how they've been funded, and talking to them. Talking earlier about once your idea is out there in the world, it becomes much more real, but it also becomes something that other people can get behind. So. Really being kind of open and excited about your own prospects is a real can be a real help to you finding the right people for you to work with. So I think we're going to wrap up now. We've been on Zoom for hours. I'm amazed at your stamina. I want to give you all a prize, especially Sam. Thank you so much, Sam. It's absolutely epic. And and again, just to say, I can speak from first-hand experience. I worked with Sam on a funding application that it's what part of the reason that we're here today. So thank you so much, Sam, for all of your wisdom. And, some of these techniques, just making sure that everything is interconnected, interrelated, and makes sense as a whole picture and a whole narrative, thinking about it as a story is really, really, really useful. So huge round of applause for Sam. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, everyone, for all your lovely comments in the chat. It's been really, really nice to meet you. We'll follow up. Jess has already said she'll send you a follow-up email with some links and some information and so on. We really hope to see you again at future sessions. You can book a one-to-one in with me, so through Elevate, the Elevate programme. Please do that. Love to speak to you all, and we'll see you again very soon.